Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, everybody. I have Anna Hrach on the line here. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So Anna is a content strategist at Convince and Convert, which is a digital marketing and customer experience advisory firm. And you guys have a ton of your own marketing channels and individual podcasts and newsletters on topics ranging from content, social, and digital, and customer experience. So could you just tell us a little bit about Convince and Convert and what you do there and your role as co-host of the Social Pros podcast and everything else that you do?
I would love to. So I've been with the fabulous Convince and Convert team for the last almost 5 years. And as you'd mentioned, we are a digital marketing and customer experience consultancy. And so we have a ton of different channels as well on our own. So we actually do consulting with clients on one side of the house. And then on the other side, we have a blog, which has been ranked one of the world's top content marketing blogs. And we also have a ton of different podcasts. Some of you may have heard me on them, of course. We had previously, I was a host of the Content Experience podcast, which is now no longer running, but all the episodes are on back catalog if anybody wants to go back. And then occasionally now what I do is I jump in with the world famous Jay Baer, who heads up Convince and Convert. I can't believe I forgot to mention that at the top. I jump in with him and co-host Adam Brown on occasion to actually co-host the Social Pros podcast. So it's kind of interesting being on this side of things today, Amy.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Yeah, it's maybe it's more easy or maybe not. I don't know. Sometimes I think it's easier to be interviewed and not be in charge, right? So what do you do on the client side for Convince and Convert? Are you involved with that as well?
Oh, absolutely. That's probably where I spend the majority of my time. So my background is actually with the client side. So I actually started off, I'm based out of Phoenix, Arizona, started off really on the advertising agency side, writing actually content as a copywriter, a full-fledged OG copywriter, like, old school radio ads and billboards. And then all of a sudden I was like, hey, I think there might be something to actual digital content creation, and then got into the content strategy and content marketing side. So that's actually where I spend the bulk of my time right now, is actually working with clients to help them really develop out their content marketing strategies and their social media strategies, and, even plussing up some of that stuff. What we see a lot today is obviously content marketing, social media marketing is standard across pretty much every organization and every industry now. But sometimes it's a lot about bandwidth, and they really need that extra set of eyes to really help them see things that they're maybe missing in their strategy and really help take it to the next level.
Yeah, so it's just really hard right now because it feels like the sky is the limit on the things you can do.
Yeah.
And we've heard you talk about how no amount of paid promotion can help you if you don't have great content.
Mm-hmm.
And so our question to you now is, what do you think makes great content?
Oh, the $1 million question. And what's funny is I actually get this question a lot. And unfortunately, there is no definitive answer to what really makes great content. But I do actually have a criteria that we use at Convince and Convert. And actually, Jay Baer, as I mentioned before, heads up Convince and Convert, world-renowned speaker, New York Times bestselling author. He actually wrote a book called Utility. And first and foremost, your content has to be utility-based. And if you're not familiar with the concept of utility, it's basically content marketing or content that is so genuinely helpful, people seek it out. So first and foremost, you have to be creating something that people actually want. A lot of times, still even today, brands are looking at content through what do we want to communicate instead of coming at it from a perspective of what do our audiences actually need? So first and foremost, you have to have content audiences actually need and are seeking, and it actually has to be helpful. On the other side of things, what I usually ask is, how is this helping you reach your business goals? And how is this helping your audience reach their goals as well? So you have to really be in the middle, which can actually be a pretty tall glass to fill. That's a pretty big order for a lot of brands. And it does take a lot of research and drilling in and really understanding your audiences and what they're looking for.
Yeah, no, this is really hard. This is where I have a huge problem with my own content veracity because, I mean, PR people, I keep talking about this, but at the end of the day, we are service providers. So, talking about creating content that is helpful to people is not veering too far from the course of what PR people do, because when we do a press release or whatever, it's not about our client, it's about whatever we think will help the news, right? So we can take that stance easily with our content, but my problem at Veracity is like, I just feel like educating and giving it, not that I'm that selfless, but my content, I really want to give back and teach people how to do things. But then I forget to take a step back and say, hey, how is this helping my company? And I literally like, I don't, and when I do that, it's boring to me. Like when I look at it. So, I mean, how do I do that?
Like in terms of continue to give without getting kind of feeling like you're feeling stale?
Well, no, how do I, so let's say I'm giving to PR professionals with, telling them how to do this and that, right? Well, okay, so what does that have to do with growing my business? I mean, growing Veracity. And I think even though this is a self-serving question, you're giving me possibly business advice, you can take whatever you say can be applied to any type of industry or any type of client or work.
Yeah, absolutely. So good question. A lot of times, especially when we start to give information away for free, we're like, okay, are we giving up quote unquote trade secrets? Or, if I give all this away for free, why would somebody hire me? And the fact of the matter is that when you give that information away for free and when you really base all of your content and your motivations for creating content and utility, it builds trust. Trust is quickly becoming the number one barometer for any consumer in any industry, whether it's B2B or B2C. Trust is becoming irreplaceable, and it's quickly becoming a reason why people choose brands or do not choose a brand. And so trust is something that has to be built. It can't be faked. It can't just be done with one-off pieces of content. It really has to be there. And utility is really, again, not to go back to utility throughout the course of our conversation, but really utility is based in trust, and it really helps build that. And there's so many different studies on consumer experience. The recent Edelman report, the Trust Barometer report, talks all about this. So it's been scientifically documented and proven that trust is quickly becoming an irreplaceable criteria for all consumers.
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of like, the hardest part is building the trust, and then possibly, ideally, the results will follow.
Yeah.
And then how do you measure results? Because that is a just question I had in general. How do you measure in terms of the metrics to know how effective your content is?
Great question. So there are thousands of different data points that we can measure. And especially when it comes to tools that help us measure data now, we can pull pretty much any piece of information, any metric that we want now. But really what you need to do is take a step back and really measure what matters, right? So if you don't care necessarily about, visits to your website, but you care a lot about conversions, well, you're going to want to focus more on conversion-based metrics. But maybe you're really just looking for a piece of content to get you more exposure and reach, then you should start really looking at, how many views something has, or maybe the reach that it has on social media. So you really actually want to take a look at what is this piece of content I'm creating? What is its intent, right? If it's not a lead generation piece, don't look at lead generation metrics. Start looking at what the actual intent is for the piece of content. And then what are metrics that align to that and help you get a better understanding of how it's performing.
Okay. And that also kind of goes back to the beginning question. It just kind of circles back to the whole point, is thinking beyond just serving people through your content. You're thinking we need to think about what is the goal. And that's quite similar in PR as well. Beyond just getting a press release out and garnering a press story, we have to think about, what does getting in the New York Times even help? Where, we think about what our goals are. So, and then here's the question that we have is, how do we combine the two? How do we combine PR? What role does PR have in content marketing or vice versa?
They have to work together. There's absolutely a role. So what's funny is we actually have been talking about this a lot at Convince and Convert, and Jay actually just kind of coined this term, and we've been really using a lot internally, which is this concept of surround sound content, right? Because there is so much content, and more content is being created now than ever before. And now it's almost having this real backlash effect with our audiences. So there's so much noise, there's so much content. People are starting to drown it out, and it's really becoming about relevancy. And it's not just about distributing messages in one perspective or distributing it to one group of people, but it's really about creating surround sound content. And that's that content should be coming from everywhere. If we have messages that we need to amplify, and PR is really sending out this message, then content should support it on the other side as well and make sure it's visible in multiple different areas. Or, once PR, gets visibility for something or it gets picked up by the press, where do people go after that? We need to make sure content is available to support that. And it's really not even just about getting the message out from our official channels either. Are there advocates that can help amplify that message? Do we have fans who are willing to help share our content as well? So that's another piece of surround sound content. And basically creating this wall of content that is similar in topic and theme and messaging, and helping people just raise it and see that visibility much better than just sort of, sending out a release and having just a page on our website for it, right? It's about making this content dynamic and live in different places, and varying the messengers as well is becoming quickly important.
Yeah. So then for me, I sometimes worry about, because we hear about the problems with duplicate content. And we know that you're a proponent of repurposing content, especially now with your surround sound thought. But how do you well, it's a two-part question. Like, can we get away with literally doing duplicate content? Or if not, what do we do? How do we not make too much work for ourselves?
For sure. So duplicate content is kind of often misunderstood in terms of, people hear duplicate content and they think, oh, we have to have completely unique pieces of content everywhere. And, thankfully, the search engines are smart enough to realize that, if you have two pages that are similar, if you have two pieces of content that are alike, that's not going to be duplicate content. It's really going to be, the old school mass duplication of pages to trick rankings, right? So that's duplicate content. When we have different messages in different areas, we want to vary them to the channel, and we want to vary them to the audience as well. But you can absolutely have them say similar things, make the messaging very clear. And while we don't necessarily want to create a ton of extra effort for ourselves, you really do need to adjust how that message is delivered on different channels. So for example, if you have a piece of content and, that message gets distributed out in a release or gets picked up by the news, that release and the news channel are going to modify it for their audiences. Then we should take it back to our website and modify it for audiences. We should then put it out on social and modify it for how it's best delivered on social and the audiences that are there. So we really do have to at least consider the audiences and the method of delivery to cater that content.
Yeah. And then that's just good marketing anyways.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't just paste a press release and call that a blog post. You'd need it to sound a little different.
You wouldn't, but it does still happen actually quite frequently. I do still see it. So especially, in the news section, it's just kind of a press release still kind of copied and pasted. So yeah, still really important to hammer home that exactly as you had said, it's just good marketing to tailor it.
So then some clients will have two different sections to their websites. They'll have a news section where a press release and the articles go. So we'll repost, let's say we get a story, we'll repost it on the news section, but then we have the blog section. So is it okay on the news section to just post your press release verbatim because it's a press release, but then on the blog section, of course you change it a little bit? Is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, I think it also depends on your organization, what industry you're in, if how much you work with the press. Obviously, if you are a high profile, visible company, like let's say it's like, like a utility company, right? Or something in public works, or something where you are in constant communication with the press. Maybe you are a pharmaceutical company, right? You should definitely have something dedicated for your audiences, and just understanding where your audiences are going on your website and for what reason. It's okay to combine them, but I think as long as that user experience is very clear, very set, and people can find information easily, you're okay. But I would say if you have dedicated audiences and they don't overlap at all, it's best to probably keep them separate.
Okay. So what do you think about syndicating sites like business to community? And I'll explain for people what that is. We will send something out, or we'll post something, and then business to community or a syndicating site will just pick it up, I guess, verbatim. What do you think about that?
Yeah, content syndication can absolutely be really, really helpful. And especially if that audience is there and it helps you reach your audience more effectively, then absolutely. And if you have budget for it and it fits all the right criteria, then you should absolutely go for it. There's no reason, why it's really any different than, writing an article for a newspaper and then having it get picked up on, a couple of different newspapers around your state. So, it's just another way to gain more eyeballs. But as long as the audience is there, as long as it works for you and it meets your intended goals, then I think it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Because sometimes we get worried that is duplicate content too.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to not necessarily be an issue just because it might be one or two articles that are going to be the same, but it's not going to be like the thousands of mass pages of duplicate content.
Okay. Yeah. Now, sometimes the hardest part is just creating or just getting started for creating content. So do you have a specific process that you go through either with advising your clients or over at Convince and Convert?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to actual content creation, so we do walk them through an entire, discovery process if we're setting up their strategy and reframing that. So, but ultimately what you do have to do is start with your strategy. So you have to really make sure your strategy accounts for, who you're trying to target and why, what those people look like and what they care about, and the key messages that you're going to communicate. So typically we have a lot of things like, content pillars and making sure that we're within kind of setting these parameters for what content creation looks like. And a lot of times, we have this tendency to think like, oh, blue sky thinking is amazing and creativity can come from anywhere. And like, yes, that's true. But actually constraints breed creativity. And the more constraints you have, the more creative your content is going to be. And having those guidelines are really, really important for creating content. Because when you typically sit down to just create content, literally nothing good is going to come from that. You're not going to really be, maybe you have a one-off piece of content that does really well, but you are going to just have really random acts of content, as Jay Baer always says. And that's the thing you want to avoid the most. So you always want to use your strategy as a North Star and really make sure you're actually reaching those people that you're trying to target.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the whole beginning of, what is the purpose of all of this? So you just said something really interesting to me, which was something like constraints breed creativity. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many times have you gotten into a brainstorming meeting or been called into a brainstorming meeting and there's no agenda? Maybe there's like a goal of we have to brainstorm around this topic and you just get crickets, right? It's because when you just give people the world, it doesn't really help. So you kind of have to do a little bit of guiding, and even doing this with yourself is really helpful where, looking at, okay, we have to focus on this topic in this way and then go is better than just saying, okay, we need to create content around this topic, right? So start to put some layers and some constraints in there and, know that, especially when you're looking at creating content and you go look at your competitors and you can see, okay, they're doing this type of content. How can I write about the same topic, but in ways that they aren't? Even that constraint is so much more helpful than just sitting down with a blank piece of paper and trying to create content.
Yeah, it just kind of gives you a guidepost or something to start with, at least.
It gives you something to latch on to.
Yeah, it's a pivot, and then you can just brainstorm off of there.
Yeah.
So creating content's one thing, and a lot of us are not afraid of that because we are creative, and then
Right.
we are strategists, and we do a lot of writing anyways. So what? But then what? So this is where you get a little kind of crazy because then you have to market it. So that's the thing. So it's content marketing. So where does the marketing come in? What do we do after we've created something that we're proud of?
That's a great, great question. So there are obviously limitless distribution channels, but yeah, you have to distribute it after you get it created. So obviously just, plunking it onto your website and hoping that SEO does its job and brings all of the eyeballs isn't necessarily going to be the best approach. Like you might get quite a bit of traffic from that, depending on, the authority of the topic or depending on how much in demand the topic sees. But yeah, I mean, social channels, looking at, emails and doing newsletters, that's always a great way to go. But one of the things that we really recommend, especially at Convince and Convert, and one of the things that Jay has actually coined is really content atomization. And that's the whole concept of taking one big piece of content and spinning it out into smaller, more bite-sized pieces of content, right? So if we create this really beautiful long form blog piece that has tons of great stats and facts and has really beautiful infographics in it, we can take all of that, break it up into tiny little bits of pieces of content, and then share them out into the world. And specifically, these pieces are designed to be shareable so that they can bring people back to the content. So content atomization, and we typically go by a 1-to-8 rule with content atomization, which is for every one big piece of content, you should be able to get 8 smaller bits of content. But that doesn't always have to be applied. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's just a good way to kind of brainstorm around some of the ways you could break up your pieces of content. But the whole goal is that those little bits and pieces get distributed out on social, or they go in your email newsletter, or they get syndicated to another site or picked up by the press. And that's kind of how content atomization comes into play with distribution.
Yeah, I love that. That goes along with our kind of what we talk about, or what I wrote about in my book, maximizing. So we're taking one thing, but we're doing 8 things off of it.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I love that. And 8 is a lot. So because if you were to tell me to share one blog post 8 times, I might think that's just kind of gross, actually. But instead, you're saying, no, you're sharing it like 8 different parts of the blog post.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you could take, like, let's say, and just for easy conversation here, you might have 8 stats within your blog post. You could share all those out 8 different times and in slightly different ways. And yeah, it doesn't feel so repetitive. It doesn't feel like you're just sharing the same thing over and over again. It's different. It's interesting. It puts a different perspective on it. And also, too, keep in mind the way that social media algorithms work now, you are not going to reach every single follower you have with every single post. So the more that you post in different ways, the better chances are you're going to actually get their eyeballs on something.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love that. Thank you. So you're busy. So you were, you just made the list of the top 50 social pros. Did I get that right?
It was a couple of years ago, actually. I got ranked one of the top 50 most influential women in content marketing. So yeah, that was a surprise, a delight, and a shock. So there's so many smart, amazing women in this industry that I was honored to be among them.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. So where can people find you? And are you going to, I mean, I know that the world of conferences is not quite happening now, but maybe virtually you'll be somewhere that people can check you out.
Yeah. So you can always tune into, in addition to this lovely podcast, the Social Pros podcast. I do guest host on occasion. Lots of amazing other social pros that we feature, basically interviews just like this one. You can also catch me on the Convince and Convert blog. I tried to just portmanteau Convince and Convert blog, but convinceandconvert.com. So I'm a frequent contributor there. And then you'll also see there's some video posts on there from me as well. So yeah, those are the 2 best places to see me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure it was helpful to all of us maximizers out there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Very, very, very happy to chat with you today.
Of course.
Thanks for listening to the PR Talk podcast. Find Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, plus more PR Talk episodes at prtalk.co. And remember to subscribe, rate, and review.